All right. So today we're going to be talking about securing WordPress, and this is something that has come up multiple times through Slack channels. I tend to run into somebody asking questions about um, how secure is WordPress, and um, is it a risk running WordPress certain ways, and so I thought it would be a good thing for us to talk about. I'll start off like all my slide decks do with a little about me page. Um, I am the lead backend developer for Team 4 at Modern Tribe. Um, I've been doing agency work for the last almost 9 years now. I'm a WordPress core contributor. I've got a few plugins in the WordPress repository. My first one was a plugin called USGS Streamflow Data, which pulls the flow rate and the height of rivers and streams. And I was using it to figure out where I wanted to go fishing next. I did a lot of fly fishing when I was in Colorado, and it was a really neat plugin to work there. And a couple fly shops picked it up and ran with it a little bit, so that was fun. And I'm located in Kernersville, North Carolina. I think for the most part, this is a North Carolina group, but with the pandemic and everything, we've been pulling in people from everywhere. So it's really great to see people from all different kinds of backgrounds and areas, and welcome everybody. Um, so just
Hey,
jumping
Chris,
in, yes,
Chris, let me
yes.
ask you a question real quick.
Hmm.
Thought I would put a link to the Slack channel in the chat, only I can't figure out how to do that. Do you know off the
Uh,
top of your head?
Tanner, do you know where that is?
No, but I will look for it.
Do you
Okay,
mind
thank you, because I'm a
finding?
Slack.
I think you've got to like get into the actual channel to find it. Um,
I'm very slack at Slack. So
Aren't we all? I've been using Slack almost exclusively for a few years now, and there are still things in there that I'm finding every day. Um, so the beginning here, what is security? There's a lot going on when we start talking about security. So I figured I'd first start off by discussing kind of what it's. Everybody thinks security is a hack-proof site. Um, Hack-proof sites don't exist. All security is identifying risk and limiting that risk as much as you possibly can. Um, there are lots of different ways to think about security, but um, the number one thing is hackers are always finding new exploits to take advantage of. Um, all we can do as site owners and developers and content managers is make sure we're limiting the risk as much as we possibly can. That is the goal. So I start off talking about hosting, and the reason I start there is because there are a lot of hosts out there that are either managed hosts that claim they have extremely good security. A lot of them do. There are shared hosts that have your site on the same box as, in some cases, 1,000 other sites, and there's no virtualization there, so your site gets lumped in with all those other sites. Um, Hosting is where a lot of issues kind of start. So I like to start the conversation about security with hosting, and um, the very first thing I always recommend people do is discuss security with your host. If if your host isn't willing to discuss security with you, you probably need to find a different host. Um, there's extremely inexpensive hosting, and my experience has been that the less you pay for hosting, it is one of those cases where you're getting what you pay for. Not to say that they're insecure, but when something happens, you're going to need somebody to help you. And if they're not willing to talk about it to begin with, chances are they're not going to be willing to help you when something goes wrong. So I always recommend contacting your host and discussing security with them, measures you should be taking. They should be able to run a free audit of your site to see if there's something silly going on, if there's been if there's anything you need to do to patch an exploit or anything like that. Um, The next thing to look at with your hosting is what server software your hosts uses and what they recommend. For example, if your host does not have an SFTP connection, um, I would ask them why. FTP isn't necessarily considered secure anymore, and everybody's switching to SFTP, and that is something that you should find out from your host why they're not supporting it. Making sure that your host is able to keep PHP versions up to date. Recently, we've moved from the old school way of thinking about PHP, where it was years and years between updates, and we were sitting on version 5.3, which an insane number of sites are still sitting on, to 5.6, which is the minimum version for WordPress now, to here in the next update when they're going to say, well, the minimum version is 7.0. Right now, PHP version 8 was just released. WordPress is not fully compatible with it yet, but if you're running on a reputable host, you should be running at least PHP version 7, and make sure that you've got the security updates for that. We've talked about it before, but the first number in a version is the major, the second number in a version is the minor, and the third number in a version is the patch number. And that patch number you want to make sure is as high as it can be for your PHP version. So if you're running PHP 7.0, you want to make sure it's 7.0 dot the highest number, because those are security and bug fixes that are going on in that. Most sites right now, if you're spinning up a new WordPress site, I would recommend starting it on PHP 7.4. 7.4 is kind of the most recent version that everybody's running new websites on. Another thing to look for, this is a little bit more technical, but as a developer, you really want to make sure that you have some form of SSH access to your server. And if you can eliminate FTP, SFTP altogether and just use SSH, that's ideal. And that's just a way of connecting through a tokenization system where you're passing a token back and forth instead of a login. So the other thing to keep in mind is that your hosts are responsible for the infrastructure of your website. They are not responsible for the actual application. So they'll make sure that the firewalls are all set up right. They'll make sure that it's in their best interest to make sure that they're blocking IP addresses that are putting across bad requests and IP addresses from areas where there's known people trying to hack sites. But it's your job as the website owner or as the developer or site manager to make sure that the application doesn't get exploited. That's not on the host. That's on you. So the host can have everything set up right. They can be using SFTP. They can have everything set up. But if you haven't set up decent passwords, or if somebody can guess your password and get in, that falls on you, not the host. Another thing to note here, I mentioned it earlier, shared hosting is, in my opinion, risky. It's very inexpensive. You can get lots of sites up at one time for a really small amount of money on shared hosting. But shared hosts don't virtualize those hosts into their own sandboxes, which means that if one of those sites gets compromised, all of them are actually compromised. This is a really interesting concept when you start looking at some of the managed hosts that are out there. And there are some managed hosting companies that do a very good job with hosting, but are actually not virtualizing the boxes. So there's some cases where even managed hosts have some security issues through another site that is then causing issues. So it's a good thing to look out for. As you get more popular, you will have more attempts at hacking your site, and if you're on a shared host, it is, in my opinion, a higher risk than if you're not.
Do you want us to ask questions as you go or
You
wait till
definitely
the
can. Yeah, please do. Please do.
Okay, so my question is, I moved to managed WordPress hosting, which is très expensive. I did it for a number of reasons, but you're telling me that there's something they might be doing wrong?
So
And
managed
how do I
WordPress
check?
hosting, managed WordPress hosting is great. I highly recommend it. But the thing to ask them is, are you on the same server? And if another site is compromised that is on the same server as yours, is your site at risk?
Oh, okay. I know the answer to that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would say like 80% of the time on managed hosts, the answer is probably going to be no. We virtualize the sites; they're all in their own sandbox. You have nothing to worry about. Most of the time, that means that you also have your own IP address,
Right.
because that's another thing to worry about. If your site, if somebody on your server is hacked and they're sending out a whole bunch of emails, for example, what the email companies will do is they will blacklist that IP address. And what they've actually done is all the websites that are on that IP address are what get blacklisted. So you could be on a site where one site was hacked and your IP address still ending up in a blacklist.
I host with Nexus, which is a liquid web company,
Mhm,
and they're specifically for WooCommerce and all this other
mhm.
stuff. They're highly optimized. I feel pretty safe.
Nexus is great. I've worked with them. Realistically, managed WordPress hosting is the way to go. There has just been a big push recently for a lot of companies to start offering managed hosting, and not all managed hosting is the same. There have been some companies that um, aren't super well known in the hosting space that are saying, "Oh yeah, it's managed hosting," when all they're doing is updating the site for you on a shared hosting environment. Does that make sense? Any other questions around hosting while I'm still in this area?
I didn't answer your question because I was on my way to the door to pick up my dinner. Yes, you answered my
Yeah,
question. Thank
you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, Chris,
Great.
I've got a question.
Mhm.
If you have clients from 2 decades ago that have been on shared hosting without unique IPs on regular stuffed in there, regular hosting, you're stuck with it. We're stuck with it. That's what they've got.
Mhm.
My question is, are you going to address how to secure a site like that too? Because I agree with you, better hosting is always better. But
Yes.
we've got older sites that are on a variety of servers and we need to secure them as
Mhm.
best we can. So are
Right.
you going to
Right.
address that tonight?
I am going to talk a little bit about
Okay,
that.
great.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
And if I haven't answered your question, and if you need to go, or something like that, feel free to shoot me a message, and I'm happy to address anything extra as well, because
I
I know
will.
this is an important thing. So,
Thanks, Chris.
uh-huh. Um, so 10,000 foot view level of what security is, right? We're outside of the hosting environment, and now we're starting to look at what is it that we're really trying to do when we talk security. The number one thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to limit the access to your website, right? We're trying to make sure that the people that are supposed to have access have access. People that aren't supposed to have access can't gain access, right? Um, there are lots of ways to do this, but this is kind of rule number one. You want to try to limit that access. That means don't share passwords, don't share user accounts, those types of things. That's all covered in limiting the access to your site. Uh, Giving each user their own SFTP account would fall in this as well. So it's there's a lot going on and limiting access at a high level. We're just talking about you want the right people accessing your site. So the next piece is making sure that one site can only talk to one site. There's this idea of containment and making sure that you can only that application that's running, in our case WordPress, isn't able to affect other sites on the server. And if you give me 1 second, I'm going to pull up some additional notes here because there was an additional thing I wanted to say on this. I'll come back to it when I find that. So the next piece is there's this level of preparation and knowledge that needs to go on when you are in the process of securing your site. You've got to know what a risk is. For example, with WordPress sites, installing every plugin is a risk. It is introducing non-native code to your website. Even though it's coming out of the WordPress repository, even if you are purchasing it from an extremely well thought of company, it is a risk. And you need to make sure that you are able to weigh the risk and reward of that plugin. I don't say that to scare you. I mainly say that because we see it all the time, right? When somebody releases an exploit, and I'll use Yoast as an example because recently they've had something happen within the last 6 months or so. But there's a cross-site scripting exploit that's found in Yoast. Yoast is extremely good about updating their plugin. If somebody finds out about a security exploit, they have a way that you submit it to where it stays under the radar, and they have a way to fix it and release that patch before anybody announces it to the world. There are some things that these big agencies and big plugin developing companies have where they share that knowledge between each other and allow each other to update them before releasing any knowledge of those exploits, which is a process that I didn't know about a year ago. And it's really neat to watch it work. And it shows me that open source works because you have these companies sharing information between each other, even though some people would call them competitors. And the goal is to make sure it is secure. So being able to keep up to date with updates as they come out. So as Yoast posts as an update, as the events calendar has an update, as these large plugins update, you'll be able to see in it if it is a security patch update, and those you need to get on as soon as you can. I don't recommend updating feature updates quickly like that. I recommend testing feature updates, but when it's a security patch, normally that is the only thing in that update, and it is something that you should be able to push without worrying about it breaking something else. That kind of goes along with making sure that you're getting your applications that you're running from trusted sources. A good example of this, WordPress repository, trusted source. You can pull in plugins from the WordPress repository, and you know that they have gone through a plugin review. You know that they are open source and that other people can see that source code. There are certain things that go on during the review process to make sure there's not hidden scripts in the code, to make sure there's not any code that is not doing what it says it does. So that would be considered a trusted source. GitHub, not always a trusted source. there's a lot of stuff that comes out of GitHub where somebody has forked a repository and injected some extra code in there, but yet you think you're getting a great deal because you just got MigrateDB Pro for free. So I recommend going to the author's site if you're purchasing it, and purchasing it from them if that's the route you're taking. But sometimes when you see those plugins out there that are paid plugins, but you're able to download them for free, sometimes you're getting some extra stuff when you're downloading those for free. So just something to be making sure you're keeping in mind. The next piece, and this is going to sound really funny talking about website security, but your local computer matters a lot when it comes to local security. And the reason for, when it comes to security in general, the reason for that is that if you're sharing passwords, or you're maybe you're a business owner and you're going into a Google Doc and you're copying out the username and password every time you need to log into a site. It's not hard for me to install some kind of malware or spyware that puts a keylogger onto your computer. And now every time you do that, I get that site's username and password. It's important to make sure you keep your computer up to date and that you install security patches at the local computer. My experience is that when a site gets hacked that's implementing all of the suggested best practices, it is because either there was some kind of spyware installed on a computer where somebody tried to log in and that information got stolen, or somebody used the computer to backdoor into the website. You were storing the FTP information somewhere and they took it, or you were leaving an FTP connection open and they used that to get in. So make sure your local computers are up to date. Make sure that your employees' computers are up to date.
Oh, good.
Those are definitely good things to think about. I'm not going to go any deeper into that piece, but antivirus, that kind of stuff is always good to have. So let's get into, obviously, kind of the meat and potatoes of this whole thing, securing WordPress itself. Inherently, WordPress is secure. It is an open source software. There are thousands and thousands of developer eyes looking at it on a daily basis. WordPress is secure. When, depending on the version of WordPress you're running, for example, you don't always have to be updating the WordPress major or minor version to be running a secure version of WordPress. WordPress maintains security releases all the way back to 3.7. That's impressive. There's not a lot of companies out there that do that. If they find a security issue in WordPress, it gets patched all the way back to 3.7. Again, the patch numbers are the third number in the version using semantic versioning. I highly recommend making sure you keep WordPress up to date. For clients that you have that may not be on a server that can handle running 4.0, 4.5, 5.0 versions of WordPress, this is a key piece to it, just making sure that you keep the security fixes up to date. There is an automatic update setting for just updating the patch. You can find it in the WordPress core docs. It's a you can set a filter that makes the automatic update only run when it's a patch update. So if you want to keep a user or a client at just the 3.7, 4.1, 4.5, 5.0, whatever, you can do that automatically through a filter. And I can we can jump in and take a look at some of those towards the end here. The next piece, same thing goes for plugins. Like plugins, some plugins use semantic versioning, and you can keep those up to date the same way. the thing to remember about plugins is that you are at the developer's mercy. This is why it is very important to make sure you're getting your plugins from trusted sources, and that you're updating your plugins as they come out, and that you're making sure that you're keeping your ear to the ground, let's say, to knowing when there are security risks. There are there are some sites out there that will let you know when there are security issues in plugins, and the WordPress repository will also tell you that there's an update when there's an update that's needed, and it's good to pay attention to those as they get released. A few of the other things to keep in mind when we start talking about securing WordPress itself. If you're starting off a new site, the easiest thing you can do to kind of security through obscurity is to change your database prefixes. It's a setting when you install WordPress. You can change it from WP underscore to some random characters, and that definitely helps. If somebody was to get access to your site, there's a good chance that they're going to write something that updates your database, and they will be expecting those WP underscore tables. That really can help a lot. Cross-site scripting as well is a known issue, where if you have a text box on a website and you put in a series of characters in there that will actually update the database in some way. Let's say somebody puts in some code that says drop all tables, and it gets executed because it didn't escape everything right. Well, if you're dropping all tables with the prefix of WP, then it's not going to affect you if you've changed your database prefixes. The next piece is if you suspect that your site has been hacked in some way, the first thing you should do is go update the security keys in that site. And in case anybody doesn't quite know, if you look up WordPress security keys, there's this API for api.wordpresssecuritykeys.org. And what it does is it randomly generates these items here that are stored in your WP config file. And if you go and wipe these out and put in new ones, it will require everybody on your site to re-authenticate the next time they try to log into the site. And so if I just reload this, those will regenerate completely. And you can just copy this entire thing. And if I load up a site real quick and I'll show you exactly where we need to add it. Nothing like live coding in a presentation to really screw some things up. So if you go into your WP config, you'll see this is the WP config native coming right out of WordPress. And if you just paste those values here, everybody will have to re-log in. And that is always kind of the first step to when you think your site's been hacked, because that is if somebody's still in the site, you want to make sure they're not in anymore. Updating the database prefix. If you didn't do it initially, you can do it here. Please don't do it without knowing how to update all the database table names though as well. If you update this after you've been running for a while and you don't know how to go through and update the prefix to all the tables, your site will not work anymore. So definitely be careful in this file in general, because you could screw something up here and your site won't load. But this is one to stay away from if you don't know how to update those. Did I hear somebody with a question? No? Okay.
Wait.
Yes. Tanner's trying to get his speakers to work. I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason my AirPods sometimes don't connect. If you have been running your site and you change your table prefix, WordPress will think that it's not installed because your database will now be looking for, originally it was set up with all of your tables prefixed with WP underscore. If you update that, WordPress is still gonna look for your new prefix and not find it and go, oh, they haven't installed because there's no tables for me. So if you do update your table prefix, you have to know how to get into your database and update all of your current tables to use that prefix. So
If you're running local,
it will work. It'll just
yeah.
kind of seem like, oh, where'd my site go?
Let me pull this up real quick. I'll show you. So you can see the prefixes here. That's the prefix we're talking about. I'll go ahead and fire up the site just to give you guys a good idea of what we're talking about here. So right now, it knows that I exist and it has stuff in the database and
you have a
we're
terrible
good.
password.
I do. I have a horrible password. It is local. I do not care. So if I take that site and let's see if I think that's the site I'm in. If I change this to WP1 and I save that, and now I go back into WordPress and I refresh here, I'm going to go through the install. So make sure you're careful there. It is easy to get back to where you were. That's not impossible, but
Chris, my host does that automatically when I do a WordPress install.
Most of them do. You have a managed host. They're normally pretty good about that. I think it might be Pantheon. It might even be GoDaddy now that puts a 12-character randomized string on every single one. It's kind of nice. So
Very nice.
And so that's a big nice to have. And so are a couple of those other items. While I'm in here, there's another great thing to show you here. If I go into my theme, so I go Appearance Themes, and I click on Theme Editor, I can edit the code directly if I want to. I can just go to Theme Editor, I can say I understand, and I'll just jump into my functions.php, if I can find it. I don't know 2021 very well, so
It was up at the
sure it's in
top.
there somewhere. Is it?
It was up at the top, right there.
Oh, right there. Thank you. So if I came here and I wanted to run something, I could just come right up here to the top. I can say var dump. Hello. And I'm going to die. And I'm going to save that file. And I just destroyed my site. That's the hardest thing about WordPress is if somebody has access to the back end of your site, you think, oh, well, the worst they can do is change some of my content. No, they can do a whole lot more than that. That's why it's important to have individual passwords on everything. That's why it's important to have different user accounts. And that's why it's important to be able to, let me go ahead and fix that real quick, because the only way to fix that is to now go into the actual theme and go into the functions file and yank that. what you want to do is you want to be able to remove this theme editor. And in order to do that, this is the piece that no one seems to ever want to do, but the thing I always recommend everybody do: come into your WP config and do define, and I think it's file edit. I think I have it on the slide here. Let's get back in there. So there's a couple of things here, but let me get you this one for sure.
It's, yeah, disallow file edit.
Disallow file edit.
Disallow file edit.
So you say in all caps, disallow file edit, comma, true. And now when we go to the site, we're not able to access that page. So that link is completely gone. I can't get to it trying to go directly to it. That is, when people hack your site, that is one of the ways they're doing it. They're going in, they're jumping into either the theme or a plugin and editing files directly in the backend. So I see that Craig has his hand up. Yes, sir.
Let me lower my hand. If you're going to do that, let's say you've got it all locked down the way you want it. Keep in mind, you're also going to have to provide more customer service if you've got clients, because there are clients who know how to go in and fix a little something here, a little something there. If you've taken that access away from them, they now have to call you. You may be fine with that, but be ready for that. Coming from an institution that has 400 websites, I will tell you that you got to be a little careful how much you lock it down.
That's yes, you've got to be careful. There's also another one there that you could do that we actually do on all of our sites. Let me find it here. Disallow file mods. I'll just copy it. And what that does is, for all of you running sites where they're older and you're sick of your clients calling you saying, hey, why haven't you updated this, when they're not willing to pay you to upgrade servers, that will remove all of the plugin update options. So now I can't add a new plugin. I can't add a new theme. I also can't update. I don't see updates either. So if you're automatically applying updates and a client may be on an older version that they can't update anymore, they can't go to version, let's say 4.0 from 3.7 because they're not running a high enough version of PHP, this is a good solution to just eliminate the nag screens of all those updates. That's one. It also allows you to, as you can see, I no longer have the ability to add new plugins because surprisingly, there's a lot of plugins that get added just by drag and dropping as a zip, and those are fairly risky in my opinion. So,
Chris, are you saying that in what situation would you turn off the nag screen on a plugin update? Or is that, and you're turning it off for everybody, including admin, right?
yes, that is turned off at the code level for every single user.
When would you do that?
So I do that on all the production sites. The reason for it is I update through an update process that goes from the local machine to a staging server, from the staging server to production. There is never a time when I want a user to update a plugin on the production server.
Okay, you're
And-
talking about some complicated website structure.
Right. That is, yes.
What would you say to normal people?
Do you want a client updating, or do you do the updates yourself?
If they pay us, we do the updates. If not, we tell them to do them. But if you don't allow updates, aren't you getting really risky for security? Understand, we don't want them adding plugins and, because I've got situations right now, but to never be able to know it needs a plugin, I thought that was pretty security risky.
So here's my theory on that. If you're managing the site, you're in charge of making sure that the site doesn't break, right?
Mhm.
So I would definitely turn off file mods and turn off file edits, because that is a risk of somebody breaking the site, somebody that doesn't know how to run updates and that kind of thing. And then I would, as the local team, schedule when to come in here, comment that line out, comment that line out,
Okay,
refresh the page,
I see what you're saying.
and take a look and see what's needed on this site specifically. And then run what you need to, do what you need to as the WordPress professional. And from there, once you're all said and done, hey client, you didn't even know you needed updates, because that nag is super annoying to clients. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a client contacting me the day after I ran all of their updates, saying that it's telling them they have plugin updates.
Okay,
Some of
Chris,
those are needed, some of them aren't.
do you ever allow WordPress or we use iTheme Security or any of those tools? Do you ever allow them to update trusted plugins automatically?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
I think that is a smart thing to do when you have taken some other steps as well. iTheme Security is a great other step. Trusted plugins, good other step. Some of those plugins that you update every time when it says it's an update and you've never had a problem, but you've got some different things going on there. This is, let's face it, the sites that have problems aren't the new sites.
Right.
The sites that have problems are the old sites, the ones that don't have the urge to pay you to do a new theme for them, or the ones that you're still trying to nudge to get on the new hosting plan that's more than $10 a month kind of clients. Those are the ones that, at least in my experience, are the ones that are a problem. So there's a couple other things here before we'll call this done. There are a couple other pieces here that I personally feel like should be turned off by default on WordPress, but they just aren't. And I understand why. XML RPC functionality. That is one that I think you should turn off by default for every site, with the caveat of, if you are running Jetpack, it actually uses XML RPC. So you have to have it on. If you aren't using Jetpack, I would suggest turning this off. Security released a big article about a year ago talking about how XML RPC is actually not secure anymore. People are using it for a DDoS attack, and it's because you can make a lot of things happen by hitting that endpoint to your website, and if you hit it fast enough and you hit it enough, it'll actually shut down your server. So I highly recommend putting this in your, obviously use at your own risk, blah, blah, blah. Put this in your functions.php. Another piece that is security by obscurity, we'll say, WordPress in the meta tags actually puts let me just go to the front end of this site real quick and we'll take a look at it because it puts a generator tag inside your head. So you can see, and I'll zoom in. So you can see just by looking at my website that it was generated from WordPress version 5.7. I have no problem with WordPress promoting themselves on my website. I love using WordPress. I think it's a great solution. I have a problem with the fact that they put that damn version on there. And the reason why is because if I was running WordPress version 5.6.1 and somebody knew how to hack my site in version 5.6.1, they just found out that I am a prime candidate for them to hack. So by adding that little filter, I'll go back to it here. By adding this little filter here, I'll just copy it. I need to go into my functions.php.
While you're doing that, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
If you do that, all right, so like I just adopted a website that was seriously out of date and I needed to know the WordPress version. So I would know how far out of date it actually was. And there's no way to do that from the admin panel. And my instructions were to go in and look at that generator thing to find out what the version was. If you take that away, tell me how I would find out the version number.
So just, I'll answer your question in just 1 second, just to kind of
Okay.
proof of concept here. Generator is gone. There is no more generator. Now, what's going on now? Well, if you'll look at these files, at the end of each of these files, it says ver equals 5.7. There's still ways to find out what version of WordPress you're running. Ver equals 5.7. Ver equals 5.7. There are
Okay.
ways to find out. That's because they're tacking on the version number in order to use it as a cache busting reference. So when you update WordPress, it will actually update the caches for all of these files. But that is one way to look at it.
Isn't the version number on the updates page
No,
It
of the
is.
dashboard?
no.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Current
You can
version,
go to
the
the
current,
updates page.
It says what you're running.
Current version, 5.7.
And if you weren't, it would tell you what you were running, right?
Yep, yep. So what happens is this update page isn't always available though.
Well, that's true.
So in older versions, it's not always available. If you just remember to go to wp-admin/update core, you'll see this exact same thing and it will tell you the current version. It also says the current version right down here. Let me zoom that in a little bit for us. Let's get out of 1Password. You get the current version down the bottom right. Now,
okay.
there are ways for plugins to remove these places where it's showing a version. So there is a chance that a plugin has overwritten that. There's some chances there, but it is available in these different places. You have a question still, I can tell.
I'm checking my site because I swear it doesn't say that.
There is a chance that it may not.
Yes, it does. It doesn't have it in the bottom right-hand corner, but it does say current version 5.7.
Good, good.
I've just been on other sites where it says you have the latest version of WordPress. To reinstall it, click here, but it doesn't tell me what that version is.
Yeah. There is also a page that gets shipped with WordPress. Let's see if it's actually included here. There is a README that will actually So the README shows you what version you're in. It may have removed the version out of the README, I think, actually. Talks about semantic versioning. I should probably show you this XML markup in the actual site. Let me just do that. So they have removed the version out of this. It used to give the version number right here, but it was a security issue, so they've removed it. But it tells you some other information that's nice to have. So the other thing that I recommend is we start getting into the plugins of security here. There are so many of these that I can't really go through all of them, but there are some things that I definitely recommend that you take a look at. One of the plugins that I use, and I'm just going to go back here to the limiting access. There is a plugin that's called Limit Login Attempts. And what it does is it keeps people, if they have tried to log in 3 or more times, it logs their IP address, it keeps them from logging into the site, and this plugin is super lightweight. It's not as heavy as some of the other plugins that do the same thing. So in order to limit access, limit login attempts is a great solution. It's something we install by default on every site at Triad. Another good plugin, iThemes, great plugin. If you're running iThemes, it is really helping you a lot with security. It is tracking things, it's helping a bunch. Couple other things that you really need to make sure that you're maintaining. There is, in my opinion, very few better security processes than having a good backup. A good backup system of your website means that you can always get back to where you were. If somebody hacks every website that you have, or let's just say, I've actually had this happen recently. A site that I have had online since I first started WordPress has just been sitting out there, not doing a whole lot. Somebody got access to it, and they went into every single post on the site and added content to every post talking about their casino and how you should follow this link to get to their casino. Basically black hat SEO type stuff. Going through 1,000 posts and update and removing that from every single post would have been miserable. But because I had a good backup system in place and I was backing up the database as well, I was able to look at the post, find out when it was updated, go back to my backups from before then, and just replace my database with the old database, and it was no longer there. So good backups are key. The other thing, and I mentioned this before with how we go about updating sites, having a Git repository of your theme, of the plugin, of your site in some cases is invaluable, because what Git does is it's version control for your website, and if you make a change, you have it noted, and then when you deploy that, you're deploying that same code every time. If somebody's injected bad code into your website in some way, shape, or form, either through FTP or whatever, all you have to do is run another deployment, and it just wipes all of that bad code out. Now, you still want to track down how they went about doing it, but it makes remediation much easier if you're keeping a Git repo of the entire site. I know that's not something that everybody's able to do, but it is definitely something I suggest people maintain. I think that is everything I had that I wanted to go through. There is still a lot of stuff out there, though. I definitely think that there are probably some questions out there, and I'm happy to answer anything that you guys have.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you use a security plugin?
I do not.
yourself? No. If you were going to recommend one, do you know anything about security plugins? Let me ask you that.
I have. Let me put it this way. I have used a few. Security has a good one because they actually check all of the files in the WordPress repo. They hash those files and they make sure that those files don't change. When those files change, they notify you, and that's good because that means that they're on top of it. So I like them a lot.
They also publish a lot of the found exploits. So like they'll find exploits in like updated WordPress versions, and they'll notify WordPress, who then updates it before anybody really realizes it, and then they will notify you if you're running. Yeah.
Yeah, WordFence does that too. I'm really, at this point, I'm really trying to decide. I started using WordFence a long time ago on my sites and my client sites.
Mhm.
Now that I've moved everybody over to Nexus, iTheme Security Pro comes with that automatically. I don't pay for WordFence anyway, but if I also spend a lot of time hanging out with the iThemes people. And I'm just trying to decide, do I switch over to iTheme Security Pro versus WordFence? Anybody got any opinions?
Do you have to decide between the two?
Well, they say that WordFence is harder on the server than iTheme Security is. That's the only thing, but no. And then there's that learning curve, learning a whole new plugin.
Yeah, my opinion on security plugins is that you get what you pay for. If it's free, I'm a lot less likely to actually trust that than if I'm paying for a service.
No, I totally trust WordFence. They know what they're doing. iTheme Security Pro, the only reason it's free is it comes with my very expensive hosting.
Well, and let's be transparent here. Liquid Web purchased iThemes.
Right.
So that is why they are offering it to you for free.
That is
something that a lot of these companies, just like WP Engine, purchased. Was it Genesis?
Yes.
No. Yeah. I mean, these companies are buying up all of these plugins. Liquid Web purchased the events calendar. There is a lot of that going on, and
iThemes just purchased the Cadence theme.
Yeah, it is.
They're trying to be. They're all trying to become a suite, right? Of everything that you need. So they're buying up all of the. I wish I'd developed a plugin about 5 years ago.
But
a really good one.
If everything is managed by the same guy,
Mhm.
isn't it more likely that he might miss something?
So
in other words, WordPress is looking at things from one point. I'm sorry, WordFence is looking at things from one point of view. iThemes is looking at it from their product point of view.
No, they're not.
And now they own something else. I would rather have two guys looking at each other differently.
There have been cases where when I worked in support, there were cases where we would have a site that would get flagged in Security, but not get flagged with Blog Vault or Managed WP that we were running. And we were running all three of those services on the same site, and they would flag different things.
If I have a site that's at risk, or I know the owners aren't very conscientious and or paying me to do a lot of conscientious things, I would run WordFence and Security, Beth. Those are the two that I would put on there.
So,
Just so
Oh,
everybody knows, I'm gonna kill the recording now because we're kind of done with the presentation piece.
okay.
And I wanted to be able to tell people that as we're doing these questions and things, if anybody had a question they weren't comfortable asking while being recorded, please feel free to ask now.